Last night, I dreamed of my brother Stephen, and I woke up crying. I wish I could tell you about Stephen, really tell you about him. I know I can't, but I'm going to try anyway. Stephen was obsessed with nature, fly fishing in outer space. Tarantulas and frogs were his favorite animals. But he loved dogs, too, and owned 3 swaggering little mutts. Ever since he was a little boy, he had unusually heavy footsteps. His gait was always calm and unusually steady, like he was walking to the beat of a slow rhythm only he could hear. Stephen was smart, too. Incredibly smart. His exhilaration for nature and science was incredible. I remember being 4 years old and listening raptly as he told me everything there was to know about the lizard cupped in his hands. He was so alive, so bright, so bright. I remember thinking, Stephen is shining just like a star. This was appropriate because Stephen loved outer space. Before I could even walk, he decided he and I would both be astronauts when we grew up. We would travel together in the same shuttle and be the first people to set foot on Mars, the first to orbit Saturn's cataclysmic storms, the first to look upon the pillars of creation and the hand of God. Stephen also wanted to be a normal kid. He wanted friends, people who were interested in tarantulas and frogs and fish and red dwarfs, who would share knowledge of insects and ecosystems and nebula, people who would care, people who would like him. But kids are shits, and adults are just bigger shits. From first grade onward, Stephen came home from school crying his heart out almost every day. I wanted to kill the people who made him cry. I still do. People like that don't deserve to exist. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you were a bully because your dad hurt you or your mommy didn't like you. I don't care if you were sad or suffering or if you only lashed out because you didn't know how to come to terms with yourself. People like you have no right to hurt people like him. The world would be better off without you. If I could undo you, if I could unexist you, I would. As months bled into years, Stephen stopped crying. Not because he was happy, he wasn't, but because he was too sad to cry. He grew quiet, flat, and inscrutable. His books about ecosystems and galaxies and quantum physics gathered dust. He stopped spending hours outside examining insects and other specimens. I watched in horror as my brother, whose enthusiasm for learning had been unparalleled, this child who was so bright he was a shining star, began to fade. I didn't know what was happening. I only knew that it was bad. Worse than bad, it was monstrous. I couldn't figure out why my father didn't march down to the school and pulverize the people who hurt Stephen. I didn't understand why my parents continued to make him go to school, or why they would soon make me go. As far as I could tell, school was a slaughterhouse, a firehouse designed to drown the stars. On my first day of school, I fought and thrashed like I was drowning. My mom was at wit's end, my father so overwhelmed he was screaming, while I lay on the floor, red-faced and screaming. The floor began to vibrate with the unique tempo of my brother's footfalls. Steady, rhythmic, familiar. Then a gentle hand touched my shoulder.
"It's going to be okay,"
Stephen said. "No, it won't!" With a grunt, Stephen lowered himself to a sitting position.
"Yeah, it will. You're normal, you know? You'll be fine. And if you're not fine, I'll kick people's asses until you are."
I looked up. My big brother stared back at me earnestly, eyes dead serious behind his glasses.
"No,"
I said.
"I'll kick people's asses until you're okay."
He gave a small smile.
"Cool."
Stephen was right. School was fine that day, and for most of the days that came after. I was in first grade, Stephen in 6th, so we had separate lunch times, separate recesses, separate everything. Most of the time, I forgot we even went to school together. Until. There's always an until. This until happened in October. My class went on a field trip to the petting zoo. We got back around 1 in the afternoon, long after little kid recess, but right in the middle of big kid recess. As I stepped off the bus, I caught a glimpse of Stephen standing alone near the track. Excitement swelled up and I broke into a run, shrieking,
Stephen, guess what? I pet a goat. It headbutted me.
But Stephen didn't acknowledge me. This hurt my feelings. Stephen never ignored me. Maybe he just didn't see me, I thought, so I kept running. Stephen wasn't alone. It had only looked like he was alone because he was so tall that he towered over everyone. There were actually 3 other kids with him. Was Stephen ignoring me to look cool in front of them? Was I just a pest, a stupid younger sibling like we saw in cartoons? Suddenly angry, I ran at him.
Stephen! Stephen! Stephen!
Stephen!
Mocked one of his friends. Stephen finally turned around. Blood was dripping down his face, cut by tear tracks. I watched helpless as one of those friends wound his fist back and drove it into Stephen's stomach. Stephen doubled over, face twisting in pain. I didn't understand. He was practically twice their size. Why wasn't he fighting back? Why wasn't he hurting them? Rage overtook me, a red curtain staining the world with fury. Thoughtless, mindless, consuming. I launched myself at his friend. No, his bully. Just as the second boy yelled, "Ryan, look out." Ryan spun around, wide-eyed, and the punch meant for my brother smashed right into my face. Blood exploded into my mouth, hot, coppery, and vile. I burst into tears, vaguely aware that Stephen had roared. My heart broke. He was mad at me for being stupid, for interrupting them, for making things worse. Then he reared back and struck Ryan with everything he had. Blood exploded into the air, a bright liquid firework spattering over the track, the grass, Ryan himself. He crumpled like a scarecrow whose ties had been cut. All around me, kids began to scream. Stephen stood there for a moment, tears streaming down his swollen face. And then he grabbed my hand, turned around, and lumbered resolutely away, dragging me behind him. His footsteps were steady and heavy as always, a serene rhythm that, despite everything, made me feel calmer. I looked up at him. He was biting his lips so hard, holding his jaw stiff so it wouldn't quiver. Ryan only got a concussion, which was bitterly disappointing because I wanted him to die. He claimed Stephen brutalized him out of nowhere, then hit me when I tried to get him under control. I furiously denied it, of course, but Stephen wouldn't say a word, not even to protect himself. Ryan had a long-standing reputation as a bully, and plenty of kids had seen what really happened, so no one could pretend Ryan was blameless. But see, Ryan was a normal kid, a hometown boy 4 generations deep. Stephen was just an overgrown, tongue-tied freak with shifty eyes and a love of creepy crawlies. So in the end, Ryan got a stern warning and Stephen got expelled. And everyone punished Stephen for it. He couldn't go to the store without facing whispers and dirty looks. He couldn't even go for walks without being harassed. One day, he and I were out walking his dogs when 2 neighbor girls drifted by, whispering and watching. Sure enough, there was a new rumor circling at school the next morning. Those girls, those stupid, horseback-riding, ponytail-wearing, spoiled-as-hell church girls, told everyone who would listen that they'd seen Stephen kicking his little dogs to death. The rumors spread through the school and through the neighborhood, too. And just like that, Stephen stopped leaving the house. My brother, the bright and shining star, was dying, and nobody saw it except me. All of the things he loved, skinks, spiders, space, and science, stopped mattering to him. I never saw him eagerly devour a book or pick carefully through dirt and leaves for tarantulas. I only ever saw his closed bedroom door or his still, blank-eyed body sitting at the table or on the couch. Lifeless, lightless. The unfairness crushed me. No, it filled me. Filled me until it spilled over and stained everything. Injustice, even the schoolyard kind, is a fast track to hatred. And God in heaven, I hated. I hate. People like Stephen are a tragedy. They're meant to fly, but no one knows how to teach them. So instead, they spend their lives trying to learn how to crawl. As my brother sank deeper, as his light guttered and faded, I realized he was no star. Just an earthbound misfit. Just a tragedy. Tragedy or not, I loved him more than anything. So if he sat at the kitchen table, staring tiredly at a book on bugs or quantum mechanics or galaxies, I sat with him. If he was sprawled on the couch looking at the ceiling with unfocused eyes, I sat with him and asked him questions about spiders, lizards, and bees that he rarely answered. And if he watched TV, I watched it with him. For a while, we watched cartoons, because that's what I wanted to watch. And like most kids, I was a selfish little shit and assumed that Stephen liked the cartoons too. Night after night, weekend after weekend. Until I fell asleep on the couch one night, exhausted, and woke up after dark. Stephen was still beside me, watching TV, and he was smiling. Small, a little uncertain, but genuine. And then, amazingly, he laughed. It was magical and a little frightening. It had been so long since he laughed that I wondered if I was dreaming. The show abruptly cut to a commercial, and the spell broke. Stephen's smile faded. I asked,
What show is that?
Kids in the Hall.
He answered.
It's pretty cool.
When the commercial break ended and the show came back, I watched raptly. So did Stephen. Every time he laughed, alien yet familiar, frightening yet lovely, I made sure I laughed too. When it ended, Stephen sighed.
That was awesome.
It was.
I agreed fervently. Kids in the Hall turned out to be Stephen's favorite show, but he liked others. Frasier, The Simpsons, La Femme, Nikita, and Miami Vice rounded out his top 5. Because he loved them, because he warmed up when he watched them, because the starlight in his eyes flickered to life whenever they were on screen, I learned to love them too. What followed were weeks of quiet, mundane joy. Golden memories of silver nights in front of the flickering TV, watching stupid skits and melodramatic adventures stoke the coals of my brother's soul for a little while. It felt like home. Until one night I fell asleep during Kids in the Hall. Cabbage Head wove his way through my dreams, squalling about the gross injustice of his existence. He stared into the camera, grimacing, and then his face began to change. His eyes drooped and his mouth stretched wide, skin sagging into a decaying cascade of wrinkles.
You are the only one who sees me.
It croaked in a low, slow voice. I opened my eyes. I shot up, struggling to orient myself without bursting into tears. I was alone, in my room, in bed. It was dark and quiet, but not silent. I could hear the faint murmur of the TV downstairs. That meant Stephen was still awake, and that stupid Stephen had put me away like a stupid baby. But right then, I felt like a baby, breath hitching on the verge of tears as the nightmare face swirled around in my head. It was so easy to imagine it's peering out from under my bed with its coin-bright eyes, ready to pounce at me in the dark. I grit my teeth and sprinted across the room, closing the door behind me. The TV was on, bathing the stairs in its flickering blue light. I strode to the landing, angry that Stephen had removed me from our TV marathon, and froze. For a second, I thought the monster from my nightmare was on screen. But it was worse. It was a dead woman. Her face was bloated and discolored, dark tongue protruding from lips that had retracted from her teeth. Stephen was staring at the screen, tears coursing down his cheeks. The woman jerked to life. I shrieked. Stephen whirled around, the TV light reflected off his tear tracks, turning them into rivers of silver. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out.
What are you watching?
I whispered.
Don't look.
Stephen said in a wheezy voice.
What show is it?
It's not a show.
What is it?
He looked pained, like someone was tearing him apart even as he spoke.
It's the future.
The woman moved again. Only she wasn't moving. Someone was dragging her. A man I didn't recognize. And no wonder. His face was hidden by a bizarre swirl of glittering stars and colored smoke. I watched as the man dragged the dead woman to a river, threw her in. The current swept over her. Her hair billowed out like a dark fan as the river water filled her mouth.
But as long as I watch,
Stephen continued.
it doesn't happen.
I took a few steps down as my heart rate slowed.
How is that possible?
Stephen pushed his glasses up his nose, then sighed.
Have you heard of the double slit experiment?
I shook my head.
I don't think you'll understand it. I don't really understand it either. But do you know what atoms are?
I'd learned about atoms in school, so I nodded.
Okay. Atoms are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Electrons are important. They pretty much decide what an atom does, whether it's stable or unstable, whether it binds to other atoms, stuff like that. Electrons are tiny, but we have microscopes and technology powerful enough to see them. We can watch them and see what they do. If you're watching electrons and the electrons know you see them, like if they can see the microscope or the camera, for example, then the electrons and their atoms behave like they're supposed to. But if they don't know you're watching, then, well, they get weird.
I waited silently. Stephen motioned to the TV.
If I see people do these things, then these people, or maybe they're atoms, they know they're being watched, somehow. So they decide to behave, and they don't do the things they do on TV. So the bad things don't ever actually happen.
But if they're not actually doing it, how are you watching them?
I don't know. I asked somebody, as a hypothetical. They said maybe it would have something to do with quantum entanglement. Maybe alternate timelines. One day science will figure it out. Until then, I'm on my own.
No, you're not.
I marched downstairs and plopped down beside Stephen.
I don't want you watching this.
He said.
I don't want you watching either. So we're even. Even Stephen.
I crossed my arms defiantly and fixed my gaze on the TV. The woman was gone now. The screen showed nothing but the river water, dark and serene. Then the screen blazed yellow. The yellow slowly broke apart into pixelated glitter of 100 different colors. Then the scene changed. It was someone, an older kid or maybe a skinny teenager, approaching an old house with a red gasoline container in hand. I couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl because the swirling mass of smoke and stars obscured their face. I watched, transfixed, as they splashed the gasoline all over the house, then took out a lighter. The house went up like kindling. The people inside didn't fare any better. I'd never before had a reason to think about it. But if anyone had bothered to ask me what happens to a human body in a house fire, I probably would have said that the skin melts off. But that isn't true. Skin erupts. It boils into blisters and splits open, deflating before blowing up again, like bubbles of lava or toasted cheese in the oven. I watched until the last victim stopped moving, until his blackened, blistered skin peeled apart to reveal scorched bones that glinted in the firelight, until everything faded to black. Stephen burst into tears. I threw my arms around him and cried too. To my immense relief, the TV didn't show these things every night. In fact, they only came on once a week. Saturday nights at exactly 11:24. So every Saturday at 11:15, Stephen and I sat on the sofa, waiting until the TV screen pulsed and turned yellow, then watched whatever followed. I saw the worst things, the very worst things. Disasters, murders, assaults, torture, abuse, things I couldn't even imagine and can barely describe. Horrors upon horrors upon horrors. They made me cry. They made me throw up. They gave me nightmares. They made me fear. They made me hate. I once asked Stephen,
How long have you been watching this?
Stephen shrugged tiredly.
Since I was 8, 2nd grade.
Knowing that Stephen had endured these things all by himself for so many years was enough to drive me insane. The only thing that kept me together was the fact that I was now with him. That because of me, he wasn't alone. We watched together every Saturday for months. Through spring, summer, and fall. All the way into winter again. One Saturday morning in January, Stephen woke up sick. This was unusual. Stephen never got sick. But it was like years of flus and colds and fevers descended on him at once. His fever spiked and kept climbing. He went to the hospital where they packed him in ice until his temperature dropped. But they wouldn't let him go home. He was too sick, and they were afraid he was going to get sicker. So they kept him at the hospital. And my parents stayed with him. That meant I was alone in the house. Alone or not, the TV had to be watched. So at 11:20, I went downstairs, and for the first time ever, I watched alone. The screen turned yellow and broke apart into a million pixels that glittered like stars. Then it darkened, and the show began. It was outside, on what looked like a farm. A couple of teenage boys entered the scene. I couldn't see their faces, of course. The now familiar cloud of smoke and gas and stars obscured it.
Get up, dumbass. Come on, what are you scared of?
One asked in a bright, malicious voice. The camera panned down, crouched near their feet. Sporting a black eye and a busted lip was Ryan. For what felt like forever, I couldn't move. I thought of Stephen, how he'd come home from school crying his heart out every afternoon for years. How he'd been targeted and tortured as a child. How he'd gotten expelled for just defending me. How he couldn't even show his face on our street anymore. All because of Ryan. On screen, Ryan whimpered. His tears splattered to the ground, glimmering like tiny dull stars. I covered my eyes. I heard terrible sounds. Thuds, splats, cracks and struggles. Laughter. The keening, inhuman cries of Ryan and the gleeful insults of his tormentors. Finally, Ryan gave an awful, full-throated scream. Then there was a thick, pulpy sound like a pumpkin falling on concrete, and he fell silent.
Oh, shit.
One of the boys whispered.
Shit.
I opened my eyes. On the ground, in a steadily growing pool of blood, was Ryan, twitching and juddering like a snake whose head had been cut off. The back of his skull was a concave nightmare of blood-matted hair and glistening tissue. The boys ran off. I watched, hypnotized as Ryan's clothes soaked up his blood. The stains spread like runes, which expanded and bled into one another until they formed great, wet flowers. Then the screen went dark. On my periphery, in the corner near the ceiling, something moved. I turned to look and froze. A face with bright yellow eyes and wet, ancient skin that hung from its face in cascades was staring back at me. Its head and shoulders emerged from the shadows in the corner. Only the corner wasn't there. Where the ceiling should have been was an opening of some kind, almost like a window. Through it, I saw a multicolored darkness, sparkling smoke and a scattering of bright stars, like the monster had opened a gateway to outer space from my living room ceiling. The monster reached out and crooked a finger that I couldn't quite comprehend, short as a thumb but long as a building. Looking at it sent a bolt of pain through my head.
No one sees me.
It croaked in a terrible, slow voice.
Except you.
Tears burned my eyes and fell down my face. They fell like a flood, like a cascade. Suddenly, headlights pierced the living room curtains and I heard an engine rumbling, followed by the sound of a car door.
I'm okay.
Stephen snapped as Mom fawned over him. Then I heard his footsteps, heavy, rhythmic, familiar, as he marched up the porch stairs. Up by the ceiling, the monster folded in on itself, eyes bubbling bizarrely as its body subtracted itself from reality, taking the doorway to the universe with it. A moment later, Stephen burst through the front door. He was so pale he looked dead. He hurried in while my parents fussed outside.
Did you watch?
He asked urgently.
Is that why you're crying?
I nodded silently.
Did you watch everything, even when it got really bad?
I nodded again. Some of his tension melted away.
Good. I'm sorry you had to watch it alone.
I attempted a smile. He smiled back, then gave me one of his stiff, awkward hugs. I hugged him back, hating myself. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I prayed, hour after hour, that Stephen would never find out that I hadn't watched the TV. My prayer was answered, with a resounding no. 3 weeks later, it was all over the news. Ryan had died terribly, beaten to death by his cousins and left to rot in an overgrown pasture. When Stephen heard, he looked at me for a long time, eyes inscrutable behind his glasses. Then he went upstairs and didn't come out for the rest of the day. He didn't speak to me the rest of the week. But that Saturday night at 11:20, he was sitting on the couch as always. He was still pale from his fever and looked unusually thin. Whether that was from his sickness or from what I had done, I didn't know. I took my seat beside him and waited silently. At 11:24, the screen blazed yellow and broke into a million multicolored pixels before darkening to a scene. As always, the perpetrator's face was nothing but a celestial blaze of smoke and stars. His victim was bound, screaming and thrashing as he approached. They weren't alone. There was someone else there. Something else. Something with coin-bright eyes and wet, rotten skin that hung from its bones in cascades. Something peering out of the corner near the ceiling. That something wasn't watching the killer. It was looking into the camera. Looking at us. The creature descended smoothly, like a spider on a string of silk, until it was suspended over the killer's head. Then it reached down with those fingers I couldn't comprehend, fingers that were short as thumbs but long as buildings, and peeled the killer's starry mask away. Then the monster dropped to the ground and slid over to the victim. I watched, stunned, as it placed the mask over the victim's face. Then the TV screen went dark.
What did you do?
I don't know.
You're lying. You didn't watch when I was in the hospital, and that's why Ryan's dead.
Suddenly the screen blazed white, startling us both into silence. It darkened slowly, resolving into a dark room lit only by the flickering silver glow of a TV. I recognized it immediately. The end tables, the lamps, the rug, the books on the coffee table, the sofa where Stephen and I were sitting at that very moment. We were sitting on the sofa on the TV too, but we weren't alone. Our parents were sitting with us. We were all crying and we were all bound and gagged. A man stepped into the frame, and with him the coin-eyed horror with its glistening cascades of skin. The monster looked into the camera and smiled. Then it contorted, sliding into the intruder like a ghost forcing itself back into its own corpse. The attacker's skin blazed briefly, burning the golden color of the monster's eyes before fading back to normal. Then the screen flickered and died.
No!
I sat there, numb and silent, as Stephen tried to turn the TV back on. Then, on my periphery, something on the ceiling shifted. I turned as the window to the universe opened, revealing a patch of stars and darkness and celestial ether in unnameable colors. In that darkness, 2 round orbs glimmered to life like dull yellow moons. Underneath those eyes, a smile spread.
What are you?
Stephen demanded. It continued to smile. With a roar, Stephen launched himself across the room at the monster, whose smile curled into a snarl. Stephen caught it by its swaying skin and pulled himself up, climbing it like a bizarre rope ladder. The creature's mouth fell open, revealing starry darkness and a tongue like a river of mercury. Then it collapsed in on itself, eyes bubbling up like blistered flesh or toasted cheese. I covered my eyes and bit my tongue to keep from screaming. There came a thunderous, house-shaking crash. My eyes snapped open. Stephen was sprawled on the ground. I rushed over and froze when I saw his hands. Where his palms should have been, there was only a mass of darkness scattered with pinpricks like bright, tiny stars. The darkness faded as I watched, leaving regular flesh and bone in its wake. Are you okay?
That thing is going to kill us. We have to stop it. We have to follow it.
We can't. You can't. Stephen.
You can. This proves it. We can go after him, even if we have to change. We can change. I changed. Our cells, our atoms, they can change. They don't have to obey unless we expect them to. You saw me. I would have been able to follow him if I just held on.
I thought of the window of darkness, of the stars glimmering through that strange extra-dimensional doorway.
It lives in outer space or a different dimension. Stephen, you can't follow it. You'll die.
Only if I know I will. If I know I won't, then I can go.
Stop being crazy!
I screamed. The lights flicked on.
What's going on down here?
It was Mom, glaring down at us from the landing.
Nothing,
said Stephen. Mom rubbed her eyes.
It's past midnight. Go to bed.
Stephen and I looked at each other. He was flat, inscrutable, almost peaceful. It took everything I had not to scream.
Okay. Sorry,
Stephen said. He turned around and lumbered upstairs, footsteps heavy and steady as always. Stephen stayed in his room for the next several weeks. He barely came out. I only ever saw him on Saturdays at 11:24, when he came down to watch the horror show. He never spoke, and certainly never discussed the fact that if the coin-eyed monster had its way, our days were numbered. Other than that, I didn't see him. I only heard the sounds of his mumbling through our shared wall, and the familiar tempo of his footsteps as he paced back and forth across the bedroom. I was desperate to talk to him, desperate to convince him that whatever he was thinking was utter insanity, desperate to make a real plan that didn't involve him dying as he chased the monster through the space door. Finally, I took to waiting by my bedroom door with bated breath, bolting out whenever I heard his door creak open. But he was always too fast for me. Even though I opened my door no more than a second or two after he opened his, I never actually saw him. Even worse than his absence was his constant mumbling. I heard it day and night. A low, endless stream of words too soft to make out even though they felt deafening. One afternoon, I decided to crack my door open, to watch and wait until he finally appeared. It wouldn't matter how fast he could go. As long as I was waiting and watching, I'd catch him. I'd finally see him. I had to wait an hour before his footsteps creaked across the bedroom floor, and his doorknob turned. I threw mine open just as his opened. I barged out into the hall, but it was empty. I saw nothing but his open door. I marched into his room, but he wasn't in there either. Only books on his bed and posters of the Horsehead Nebula and scientific diagrams of tarantulas and fish on his walls. Frowning, I leafed through one of his books. It was huge, a textbook of some kind. I recognized words: atoms, atomic migration, quantum entanglement, string theory, but couldn't make heads or tails of what it was actually saying. Then something caught my eye. A glint of glass across the hall. I turned around and suddenly he was just there. Stephen, big and solemn as always, with his glasses and his favorite Iron Maiden t-shirt. He looked normal, except for his hands. Where his hand should have been, there was an expanse of velvet darkness swirling with stars.
How can you see me?
He asked irritably. I searched for words, but found none.
You're the only one who can. You need to stop.
He lumbered back into his room.
It's the only way I can save you guys.
Stephen.
He scowled.
Just let me do what I need to do, all right?
Then he shoved me out of his room and closed the door. I didn't see him again for days. That Saturday night, out of habit more than anything else, I went downstairs. I went down early, hoping to goad Stephen into a conversation before the show started. But he wasn't there. It made me want to cry, but it didn't change the fact that I had to watch. More than ever now, I had to watch. I turned the TV on and sat down, waiting for the inevitable flash of yellow. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a glint of glassy silver.
Can you stop looking at me?
Stephen snapped. I watched, unable to move or think, as he materialized in the corner.
The door is right there.
He pointed to the corner by the ceiling, where the coin-eyed monstrosity always appeared.
Anyone can open it if they know how, including me.
I started to blubber. Stephen's lips quivered, which made me cry harder. Then he pushed his glasses up his nose and scowled again.
Knock it off. It has to happen. If it doesn't, we all die. You know that.
I can't help it. I just see you. I always see you. I don't want you to go.
This goes beyond you and Mom and Dad, okay? That thing, that monster. I don't even know what it is, but it's bad beyond bad. Someone has to stop it to keep everyone safe. I can stop it.
Shut up!
I have to go.
He told me.
But I can't if anyone sees me. And no one sees me except you.
His lip quivered again.
Close your eyes.
Tears streamed down my face. No!
Close your eyes.
The awful face, with its cascade of wrinkles and bright eyes, filled my mind's eye. The ancient, terrible, inhuman thing, the horror I'd unleashed on the world, on reality, and on my brother. I can't, Stephen. I can't!
Close your eyes. Now.
Stephen said. A sob worked its way through my whole body and erupted, so overpowering my knees gave out. I covered my eyes. My brother's footsteps thudded steadily on the floorboards as he crossed the room. I heard shuffling sounds and a grunt. Then I heard nothing. When I looked up, there was no glint of glass, no familiar silhouette in the shadows, no heavy rhythm of footfalls, no window to the universe. Stephen wasn't there anymore. I leaned back, numb. At 11:24, the TV screen blazed yellow, fading as always into a cascade of stars that darkened to black. It stayed black. The TV was broken then. No longer a window to bad people. No longer a secret way to stop their atoms from banding together to visit irreparable harm. Tears burned my eyes as they fell, and fell, and fell. After a long time, I noticed that a single dot of light had appeared on the screen, and another, along with vast, dreamy swaths of color. Stars, I realized. Stars and planets, and the bright hypnotic radiance of celestial gas and debris from supernovas eons past. Outer space. The camera moved in slowly, bringing a swath of cosmic color into focus. Within that serene yet explosive beauty, something shimmered. A familiar shape resolved. A ladder. And on the ladder, my brother. I gaped as Stephen, without the benefit of a helmet or a spacesuit or even a coat, wearing nothing but his favorite Iron Maiden t-shirt and his glasses, climbed an endless ladder somewhere 10 trillion light years deep in the universe. The camera zoomed out, then up, then in on another familiar shape. I saw cascades of rotting skin swinging and eyes like filthy coins in sunlight, and a mouth with a river of mercury for a tongue. The monster. It was angry. It was scared. And it was fast. But not quite as fast as Stephen. My brother climbed resolutely with the same purpose he'd shown when he marched me out of the schoolyard so long ago. Stern, solemn, determined, he was going to catch the monster. He knew it, and looking at him, I knew it too. But that meant I couldn't watch. No one sees me except you. But what if I was wrong? Panic exploded, threatening to suffocate me. What if I was supposed to watch to keep the monster from killing Stephen?
Close your eyes.
But what if by watching, I kept Stephen from killing the monster?
Close your eyes.
This was an impossible decision. It wasn't fair that I had to make it. Except it was. I was stupid. I was bad. I'd caused this all by letting Ryan die. This was my fault, my responsibility. So I had to make the choice. But which choice? Stephen climbed as stardust and ribbons of unimaginable color drifted around him, sliding over his wrists and around his feet, lifting him, helping him. He was silent, but there was sound all the same. A faint, drifting song, like a cosmic harp or a chorus of inhuman voices. And I knew somehow that it wasn't just sound, but things, real things, powerful things, the strings that bound the universe together, strings that the monster slid between like a virus through a filter, strings that wrapped themselves around Stephen and pulled him upward. But to what? To victory for taking on a cosmic beast? A monstrous destroyer unbound by time or space or reality itself?
Close your eyes.
Or to his death for breaking the laws of nature and bending the strings to his will? I didn't know. I don't know. I will never know. But I closed my eyes. They were still closed when the faint, unearthly hum finally faded to nothing, and stayed closed for what felt like forever. When I finally opened them again, the TV screen was blank. The house was silent, and it was 2 a.m. Hollow and sick, I went up to Stephen's room. Every wall was covered by glow-in-the-dark stars, diagrams of bugs and trains and spiders, photos taken by the Hubble telescope, photos of the Horsehead Nebula, of Jupiter and Mars and the pillars of creation, and 100 or other places so far away that the human mind cannot truly comprehend the number. I curled up on his bed and cried, finally falling asleep as the sun rose. I dreamed of him, of us, of seeing Mars, of orbiting Saturn as its apocalyptic storms raged below, of dodging comets, of looking up in awe as the pillars of creation loomed over us in their incomprehensible glory. In the dream, I heard the ethereal, chorusing song and I felt peace. But when I woke, I just wanted to die. That hasn't changed. But there is one thing that keeps me going. Only one. Knowing that if I really want to, and if I really believe I can be unseen. I can disrupt my being, my very existence. I can bend the threads that bind the universe together and slide between the strings of reality. I can find the window to the universe and open it. I don't know how, but I know I can. Someday I will. I don't know if I'll join my brother or if I'll have to pick up where he left off. I don't know if he's alive or if he's dead. And when I closed my eyes the night he left, I knew I would never know. But I will follow him one day, whether he's waiting for me or not. I will open the door to the universe and follow him. I have to because I know what's at stake. I know that the threads of the universe are singing a song no one ever hears, simply because we don't know that we can. But I can hear it. It is beautiful. It is cosmic. It is holy. It is everything. But it is not perfect. Within it, like the dissonant notes of an untuned violin in a symphony, I hear wrongness. And at the heart of the wrongness is the beast sliding between the threads, pulling and tangling and breaking, interfering where he does not belong. But underneath that wrongness, I hear a rhythm, a slow and steadfast tempo, a quiet foundational beat in perfect time with the symphony. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but to me, it sounds just like my brother's footsteps.